Hello, now we are going to be practicing how to do our adding and subtracting of fractions today, and we are going to be following our 4 steps here, and we're always going to do the same steps whenever we're adding or subtracting fractions. We're going to find the lowest common denominator, LCD, always our first step. Then we're going to change all of our fractions so that they have the lowest common denominator, so that all of their denominators are the same and that they're the lowest common denominator. Then we are going to be able to add up the numerators, and then if we can, we're going to simplify. And that's our steps, and that will always be our steps anytime we see adding or subtracting fractions. So let's get into it. If we look at our first problem here, so our problem 1, a half plus 3 halves. Well, we're going to follow our steps. That's how you're going to see the answer to this very quickly. But we're going to follow our steps. I have my lowest common denominator. That's going to be, well, it's just 2 and 2. So our lowest common denominator is going to be 2. They already have the same denominator. So I don't have to do any changing around here. I already have both of my denominators are my lowest common denominator. So now I can go and sum up my numerators. So I write equals, because this is going to be the same. 1 plus 3 are my numerators, and I have 2 as my denominator in both cases, so I can write it as a single fraction. Both of these are over 2. And now I can add up my numerators. 1 plus 3 is 4, all over 2. And now I look if I can simplify, and I can see that I can. I'm looking for common factors, numbers that divide into the top and the bottom of the fraction, divide into both the numerator and the denominator. And I can see that I have a common factor of 2, top and bottom. So I'm going to divide the bottom by 2, and I'm going to divide the top by 2. And if I do it to both the top and the bottom, I haven't changed the meaning of the fraction. So I can divide both top and bottom by 2, and I end up with 2 over 1. And we remember that we often write numbers over 1 as just a whole number. So 2 is our final answer. And those are all of our steps. Now let's practice them again. If we have our question here, 4/5 plus 2/3. First job, get the lowest common denominator. So we have 5 as a denominator and 3 is the denominator. So what is the lowest common multiple of 5 and 3? Well, it's 15. So the number we're aiming for in both of our denominators is 15. Well, what can I do with my 5 here? I want to end up at 15, and I know I can multiply or divide top and bottom of a fraction by the same number. So what I can do is multiply 5 by 3. Now if I do something to the bottom of a fraction, I must do it to the top. So I have multiplied my first fraction by 3 over 3, and my second fraction, I'm at 3, I want to multiply it by something to get to 15, I'm going to multiply it by 5. Therefore I must multiply the top by 5. So I'm able to do that multiply out now. I have 3 by 4 is 12, equals 12 all over. 3 by 5 is 15. Now I have plus 2 by 5 is 10. 3 by 5 is 15. I now have what I like. I want to have both of my denominators the same. They're both 15 now. So now I can go on to my next step. I can sum up my numerators. So I have 12 plus 10 are my numerators, and they're both over 15. They have the same denominator. I can add that up, and I get 12 plus 10 is 22 all over 15. And there's no common factor that I can see between the top and the bottom, so that means that my job is done. That is my final answer. Now before we continue, what I want you to do is try and do these questions, pause the video, try and do these questions, and then come back and see how it is we can do the steps. So make sure you keep your method and your steps all the same, but you'll learn much more if you stop and go through these questions before we continue the video. Now, for our next question, after you've tried it yourself, we're back now and we're looking at our solutions. So we're starting out by looking for the lowest common denominator. And we have 2 and 4 are our denominators. The lowest common denominator is going to be 4. We're looking for the lowest common multiple of 2 and 4. And now that we've got that, we are going to get all of our denominators the same. Well, I'm at 2. I know I can multiply by whatever I want. So I can multiply by 2. In order to get 2 by 2 is 4. And I must do the same on the top of my fraction. Now here, I'm already at 4. So I don't need to do anything. Some of you will prefer to always follow the steps, so you can multiply by 1 over 1 if you like. You won't lose marks for doing that, but you don't have to if you don't want to. So now we'll do out our multiply. 2 by 9 is 18, all over 4. And we have minus 3 over 4. Now we have what we like. We have the same denominator, the lowest common denominator, underneath all of our fractions, so we can add up our numerators, or sum up our numerators, because this time we have a minus. So we have 18 minus 3, that's the sum of our numerators, and they're both over 4. So now we're able to do that subtraction. We have 18 minus 3 is 15 all over 4, and there's no simplification that we can make in this particular case. So that's our final answer. Continuing on, I have 3 minus 2/5. So I need to find my lowest common denominator. So what is my lowest common denominator? LCD. Well, I know that any whole number, just like we talked about in our first question, any whole number is secretly over 1. So I have a denominator of 1 and a denominator of 5. So I'm able to say that the lowest common denominator is going to be 5. So here I'm at 1 and I want to multiply something to get to my lowest common denominator of 5. So I need to multiply the bottom by 5. And if I do it to the bottom, I must do it to the top to keep my fraction the same. And here I don't need to do anything on my right hand fraction. It's already at 5. So I multiply 3 by 5 is 15 all over 5 minus 2 over 5. Now I have my denominators the same. I can sum up my numerators. I have 15 minus 2 all over 5. They're both over 5. And I get 13 all over 5. And there's no simplification I can do there. Now my next question. So that's my final answer. My next question here, I have 3 things. I don't have to do anything different. I'm still finding my lowest common denominator. But I want to look carefully at any fractions question I get and see, can I do a simplification before I jump into my maths? And I can see here that I can. 8/6 can be written in a nicer form, and it would make the sum easier if I simplified before I did anything else. So we're always going to look to see if we can simplify before we do the rest of our problem. So we have 7 over 4. Nothing simplifying we can do about that. Plus, what's the common factor top and bottom here? Is going to be 2. I have a common factor of 2, so I can divide above and below by 2. Just like multiplying above and below by a number, I can divide above and below by a number. And I end up with 4 over 3. And now I have everything simplified. I can go on with my question. So what's my lowest common denominator? My lowest common denominator. Now we're on step 1. My lowest common denominator for 3 and 4 is going to be 12. So I'm looking for all of my fractions to have a denominator of 12. So I'm at 3. What do I need to multiply to in order to get to 12? I need to multiply by 4. If I do it to the bottom of my fraction, I must do it to the top. Here I'm at 4. I want to get to 12. I need to multiply by 3. And if I do it on the bottom, I must do it to the top. And likewise here, I am at 3. I want to get to 12. I must multiply by 4. And if I do it to the bottom, I must do it to the top. So now I'm going to multiply out all of my steps. I have 8 all over 12 minus 3 by 7 is 21 all over 12 plus 4 by 4 is 16 all over 12 And now I'm going to add up my numerators. They're all over 12 now, so I can go on to adding up my numerators or summing up my numerators. So 8 minus 21 plus 16 all over 12. And when we add up our numerators, when we sum up our numerators, we're going to get 3 over 12. And this time I see I have a common factor top and bottom. I can divide above and below by a common factor of 3. And when I do that, I get 1 over 4. And that is my final answer, my simplified final answer. Now, if I look up to this question here, I see I have a mixed number. I never do any maths of any kind with a mixed number. I'm always going to turn it into an improper fraction. So I have 2 and 2/3. I want to turn this all into just thirds. So the way that we can do this is I have 2 here, which is a whole number, which means it's over 1. So I have 2 over 1 plus 2/3. So I ask myself, how many thirds would there be in 1? There would be 3/3 in 1. So if I have two whole numbers, I would have a total of 6/3. So this is really 6/3 plus 2/3, which would be 8/3. Now there are multiple ways to do that, and you're free to use whichever one you're most comfortable with. And then we have 4, and I know that 4 is secretly over 1. And now that we've done our conversion, we are able to follow our steps. Our lowest common denominator is going to be 3. So we want to get 3 here. 3 is already 3, so that's fine. I multiply here by 3 on the bottom and 3 on the top to keep everything balanced. So I have 8 all over 3 minus 4 by 3 is 12 all over 3. And when I sum up my numerators, 8 minus 12 all over 3. When I do that out, I get minus 4 over 3. So this time a negative number, and there's no simplification we can do, so that's our job done. Now in our final problem here, we have 2 things we need to do. We recognize that minus 1 is really minus 1 over 1, and we need to turn this mixed number into an improper fraction. So 4/5 minus 1 over 1 plus, how many quarters would there be in 1? There would be 4. So in 3, there would be 3 times as many. There would be 12. So we have 12 quarters plus 1 quarter is 13 quarters. And now I'm looking for adding up all of my, getting my lowest common denominator for all 3 of my fractions, and that is going to be 20. So my lowest common denominator is 20. I'm at 5, so I'm going to multiply by 4 to get to 20. I have to multiply by 20 over 20 here. And I have to multiply by 5 here. And multiply by 5 on the top as well to keep everything the same. And when I do that, I'm going to get 4 by 4 is 16 all over 20 minus 20 all over 20 plus 65 all over 20. And now I'm going to add up my numerators. 16 minus 20 plus 65 all over 20. And when we sum up our numerators, we find that we get 61 all over 20, and there's no simplification we can do there. There's no common factor. So we stop at that point. So we can see the steps are always the same. We're looking for our lowest common denominator. We're going to multiply above and below by our same numbers. We're going to look for any simplifications we can, and we are simply going to follow our 4 steps. And if we can do that and get used to it, we'll be able to handle any fractions questions that we might have to deal with.